From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Voices are raised in the courtroom today as Donald Trump's attorneys cross-examine Michael Cohen in the hush money trial as a new group of Republican lawmakers join the former president in Lower Manhattan today. We'll have reaction from former prosecutor Jessica Roth.
President Biden invokes executive privilege to a request for recordings of his interview with the special counsel who called Biden an elderly man with a poor memory. Our political panel responds.
Ties between Russia and China are reinforced as leaders of the two countries meet today to reaffirm their no-limits partnership. For what this means for U.S.-China relations and the war in Ukraine, we'll talk with Ian Bremmer of the Eurasia Group. Lot to cover today, Kaylee, from here in Washington, around the world, and to Lower Manhattan, where it was another display of support today for Donald Trump.
Indeed, you had a number of lawmakers from the House Freedom Caucus, including, for example, Matt Gaetz or Andy Biggs, Eli Crane. You could kind of take your pick. There was a whole host of them who are down in New York today. And, of course, it's just the latest in a series of visits we've seen from lawmakers to New York rather than spending their time here in Washington on other matters. Not to say that Congress wasn't without work to do today, and maybe they got some things that they didn't want, including an executive privilege exerted by President Biden to make sure that the lawmakers asking for it could not get their hands on the tapes of his interview with special counsel Robert Hur. Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, wasn't all too thrilled with that decision.
The president is using all of his power to suppress their release. And rather than defend our closest ally at war, President Biden is using his authority to defend himself politically.
Joining us now, Bloomberg's Nancy Cook and Gregory Cordy. It's great to have you both at the table. Nancy, I don't know to what extent Americans are paying attention to this most recent wrinkle here when it comes to whether it's presidential immunity in Donald Trump's case, executive privilege, as Joe Biden is invoking. Are these themes that matter to voters?
I don't think that they matter a ton. I mean, I think the idea of executive privilege is not something that's going to resonate with a huge number of voters, particularly now, 6 months before the election. We have seen what's been happening in New York with Trump's hush money trial also sort of not resonating as much as the Biden campaign would want. And I think that what voters remain focused on is foreign policy, Israel, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening with the economy. These are really the issues, and sort of all of the trials, executive privilege, sort of these ongoing cases, I think most people just can't follow day to day.
Well, perhaps they could follow more easily if they had access to the actual audio tapes that would likely be clipped and circulated over and over again, and potentially campaign ads. We didn't just hear from Mike Johnson, who expressed disappointment with this decision from President Biden, but also from Senator Lindsey Graham, who had this to say to Bloomberg earlier today.
I'd like to have what he set out because the report's pretty damning, and I think the American people need to hear it for themselves. Put the shoe on the other foot. If you had a report, suggesting that President Trump wasn't with it, everybody would be, every media outlet in the country would be yelling to release the tapes. Release the tapes.
The senator there speaking with a number of reporters on Capitol Hill earlier today. And when he's talking about what he says is a pretty damning report, it's worth bearing in mind that what Robert Hur said in this, in part, was that he wasn't pressing charges, or he didn't recommend it, because he thought a jury might view President Biden the same way he did, as a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. We were all buzzing about it for weeks after it was released. If you don't allow the tape of the conversation out, does it suggest that you actually might have something to hide about your mental acuity?
Yeah, so the transcript of this is mostly out. It's been slightly redacted. Congress has access to what the president said, but there is this intangible component to it, right? Because of how Hur characterized it in his report as sympathetic, well-meaning man with a poor, elderly man with a poor memory. That's a subjective judgment of how he presented himself that you can really only get from that tape. And the reason why the White House does not want this tape released is the very reason why Republicans in Congress do want it released, is because exactly that. This is more political than substantive in terms of trying to figure out. Remember, this all started with did President Biden, then Vice President, illegally keep classified information at his home. We're long past that now. This is now about President Biden's age and his mental acuity.
You guys both specialize in covering politics and communication. You heard Jim Jordan's point on this. The transcript is not the same, Nancy. He invokes inflection and emphasis. The changes in voice are what lawmakers want to hear. Is that a fair request?
I mean, I think that the Trump campaign and the Trump allies like Jim Jordan really believe that, Biden is too old to be president, even though Trump is almost the same age. But they really sort of are trying to make his mental acuity a main point of the campaign. He stutters sometimes, he makes verbal gaffes. I think that they want to use this tape to really highlight that. And they will splice it, as Kayleigh said, and put it in a bunch of ads. And the Biden people, they don't want this to be an issue. And so they're really trying to clamp down on it.
Okay, so you have the age issue that we know dogs this president. There's a number of others as well, including the economy, many others, including the war in Israel. And as a result, he's losing support in a number of key demographic groups, including black voters. But it does seem that he's paying attention to that issue in particular this week, as he has a series of events, including today, meeting with the families of the plaintiffs in the landmark Brown versus Board of Education case. And we heard from the White House press secretary, that is Karine Jean-Pierre, earlier today.
The president was proud to participate in this meeting and honor the legacy of those who paved the way for progress and hard-fought rights for Black Americans, while highlighting his vision for how we must continue to build on these freedoms.
So, Gregory, there was this meeting today. He will be at the African American History Museum as well this week. He'll go down to Atlanta to give the commencement address at Morehouse College this weekend. We can tell pretty clearly what this effort is aimed at. But is it going to go far enough when consistently polls are showing that increasingly black voters are turning toward Donald Trump?
I don't know how much they're turning towards Donald Trump. That remains to be seen. That they certainly are turning away from Joe Biden. Joe Biden should be clearly in the 80s to 90s among black voters. He's only in the 60s. Many of those voters are not saying they're going to vote for Trump. They're saying, I'm undecided. They're staying on the sidelines. They want President Biden to earn his vote. There is a little bit of an uptick in terms of how many say that they're going to vote for Republican. I think that might be generational. Those might be the ones that President Trump is targeting. But President Trump is making the case and really sort of encouraging black voters to think about what have Democrats done for you lately. Black Democrats are especially economic voters. They're worried about inflation. They're especially worried about the cost of housing. And so they want to hold Joe Biden's feet to the fire to deliver on those issues.
I'll tell you, Jim Clyburn takes a different view on this. It's pretty interesting. He's about to hit the road with Joe Biden. And, of course, we all know that he had a lot to do with Joe Biden winning the election the first time around. We spoke yesterday with Dr. Bernice King, who made it clear that consistency was a problem beyond promises unkept or policy even, the consistency of being present. Jim Clyburn tells Punchbowl, I don't know what this polling is all about. Quote, Joe Biden does not have a problem with black voters. Whatever you hear to the contrary, that's just not true. How important of a role will Jim Clyburn play in this election, again, possibly for Joe Biden?
I think he'll play a huge role, but also I think that, a bunch of, surrogates who are black politicians will play a really key role. I mean, Biden really needs to hold on to that black vote. That is a really key part of his coalition, heading into the 2024 election. And we have seen a lot of polling showing Trump really is making inroads, particularly with black men who, as Gregory said, are disappointed by pocketbook issues and also some of the foreign policy crises that Biden has faced. And even if, Trump really just needs to shave off like a few percentage points, and that could really make a difference in black support in swing states with the election.
All right, Bloomberg's Nancy Cook and Gregory Cordy, fantastic to have you as always. Thank you so much. Now, another story we're following today is a victory for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau at the Supreme Court. The High Court today ruling that the agency's funding will continue, overturning a lower court decision, voting 7-2. The justices rejected arguments that the setup of the agency was in violation of a constitutional provision that requires congressional appropriation for government spending. Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts reacted to the decision afterwards.
The CFPB is here to stay. And this is really important because it's all about a level playing field. The giant banks really don't like that the CFPB is out there, and their Republican friends help them in attacking the CFPB. This latest attack should never have gone to the United States Supreme Court. It should have been tossed out of court from the beginning.
Some of her Republican colleagues, not a shocker, have a different view. Senate Banking Committee ranking member Tim Scott saying today in a statement, quote, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau lacks important accountability to Congress and the American people. And under Director Chopra, the agency routinely and brazenly acts outside of the scope of its authority. He says, I will continue to work to hold the Bureau accountable and push back on its abuse of power driven by politics instead of policy, unquote. Coming up on Balance of Power, we're going to look more closely at what comes next in the criminal trial of former President Donald Trump. Former prosecutor Jessica Roth will be with us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I think it was a very interesting day. It was a fascinating day, and it shows what a scam this whole thing is.
Former President Donald Trump at the end of another day of testimony from his former fixer and attorney, Michael Cohen. The judge in this case, which of course is the hush money case in New York, telling both sides to be prepared to deliver summations on Tuesday. Let's bring in now former prosecutor Jessica Roth of Cardozo Law School. Jessica, we have heard now 3 days, as I said, of testimony from Michael Cohen, including more cross-examination today in which the defense was clearly trying to make it known, especially to the jury, that he has been a proven liar, found guilty of perjury. He has spent time in prison, that he is not someone who has never lied under oath. Why would a jury be convinced that he's not lying under oath this time?
Yeah, so the defense has done an effective job of bringing out prior lies that Michael Cohen has told, including those under oath, and in suggesting to the jury that Michael Cohen lies whenever it's expedient for him to do so, when he thinks it's to his advantage to do so. Now, the prosecution will argue that most of those lies, including the ones under oath to Congress, were done at the behest and for the benefit of Donald Trump, and that they all predated when Michael Cohen broke with Trump. I think the biggest problem for the prosecution and Michael Cohen in that regard is that Michael Cohen has, even since he broke with Trump, said things that arguably are more lies under oath, including statements he made at his own guilty plea, admitting to crimes that he subsequently has said he didn't commit. So I would say that's among the most problematic aspects of Michael Cohen's past and current testimony for the prosecution. And for that reason, among others, including his bias against Mr. Trump, which is evident, the prosecution needs to corroborate Michael Cohen's testimony as much as they can. And so I think what we're going to see from the prosecution arguing in their summation next week is that every aspect of Michael Cohen's testimony, with very small exceptions, is corroborated by the testimony of other witnesses who do not harbor the same kind of bias against Mr. Trump, and by documentary evidence in the case. And it's a very narrow category of the narrative that Michael Cohen provides the sole direct testimony about.
Well, Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's attorney, certainly was trying hard to land a glove today on Michael Cohen. To your point here, Jessica, he was also raising his voice. He started yelling questions and challenging Michael Cohen, which actually drew a bit of emotion out of the witness for the first time today that we've seen over the course of several days of testimony. Is that a win for the Trump legal team?
I think certainly there's been an effort to try to get under Michael Cohen's skin because he has come across mostly as pretty calm and measured. Certainly he did come across that way on his direct examination. And so I think that one of the tactics by the defense is to try to get him to sort of get out of this performative role into sort of the Michael Cohen who he was, at the time of some of the events in question, and who I think the defense would contend he still is, right, which is this person who's not so measured and trustworthy as he would like to come across as. So I think they're trying to get some emotion out of him, get him rattled also, so maybe he will admit some things and be less careful in his testimony. But of course, it could also be that part of that strategy is really just to satisfy the client. client, who is Donald Trump, and to show that Mr. Trump's lawyers are really sort of going back to bat for him to the full extent possible. It's not clear to me sort of how successful the efforts were to rattle Michael Cohen before the jury.
Well, on the subject of the jury, Jessica, if the timeline outlined by the judge today is to be believed, then we could get closing arguments early next week. How quickly do you expect a jury could turn around a verdict in this case?
Well, if the parties sum up early next week, which the judge indicated today could be as early as Tuesday, then it's possible that the jury will be starting its deliberations by Tuesday afternoon. I think the court's not going to be sitting on Wednesday, but then the jurors should have, I believe, Thursday and Friday to complete their deliberations. So it's really going to depend on how soon the jurors reach consensus, if they can, on the correct verdict in this case. Their verdict does have to be unanimous. Often jurors will sort of do essentially a poll preliminarily when they go in to start their deliberations. And if that suggests they're all on the same page, then their deliberations could be very quick. If there are those who are not in line with the others, or who simply want to review the evidence carefully before they indicate how they'd like to vote, then it could take longer. But I would imagine that the jurors would like to complete their work before the holiday weekend, if at all possible. But I imagine they'll be conscientious about it. There are 34 counts that they need to go through. And so, you never know exactly. But it doesn't strike me that this is a case in which necessarily the deliberations are going to go on at such length.
Is there a mechanism for jurors to police themselves or each other if during deliberations, in this case, a politically driven theme here, I don't know if I'm using the right words, but a political backdrop with a former president here in a campaign cycle. If fellow jurors think that there's a big MAGA supporter in the room or a diehard Joe Biden guy, is there something they do about that?
Well, the jurors can certainly bring it to the court's attention if a juror is not deliberating in good faith. They can write a note that'll be brought to the court's attention and the attention of the parties that they're having a problem in their deliberations, whatever it is the source of it, in which case the court could bring in the juror or jurors in question and remind them essentially of their oath, which is to apply the law as instructed by the court to the facts in the case. And so there is that mechanism, right, for bringing it to the court's attention that there is essentially a problem in the jury room without revealing to the court exactly what the nature of the problem is. There's also a charge that the judge can give to the jurors to continue working to the extent that they can to try to reach a unanimous decision in the event that it appears that they are deadlocked. But at some point, if it appears that they really cannot reach consensus, then a mistrial would be declared and the jurors would be discharged. And then that would be the time for a new trial to be ordered if, in fact, the jurors cannot reach a unanimous verdict.
Jessica, thank you so much. We'll have this in mind when we prepare for a verdict next week. Jessica Roth, great analysis today on Balance of Power. Coming up, Bloomberg's conversation with JPMorgan Chase Chair and CEO Jamie Dimon. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. We're glad you joined us. Earlier today, Bloomberg's Francine Lacqua spoke with JPMorgan Chair and CEO Jamie Dimon on a wide range of topics, many pertaining to our conversations here on Balance of Power, from inflation to competition with China and the upcoming U.S. election. Here's part of that conversation.
So the geopolitical situation is very tense because of Ukraine and Russia, Iran, the terrorist activities in Israel, North Korea, nuclear blackmail. We've never had nuclear blackmail before, and this is, of course, affecting our relationship with China. And, it's going to be hard to have a great relationship with China as the Ukraine war is on. We're kind of on different sides of that, and put Taiwan aside. Having said that, I think it's the right thing for America to fully and deeply engage with China, competitively. Every nation is going to do what's in their own interest for national security. So should America. We should define that fairly and properly. If there's unfair trade, negotiate that or do whatever you need to do. But the engagement is the right thing to do. China is not a natural enemy of the United States. They have a lot of their own problems. So, to me, we could work together as best we can. And then we have common interests: climate, anti-nuclear proliferation, anti-terrorism.
But what does it mean for a bank working in China, actually, given all of this volatility?
They're cautious. I mean, China, if you look at China from a risk-reward basis, it used to be very good. It's not so good anymore because all these things can go wrong. And remember, we bank, I've got the number, but 1,500 multinationals in China. They're not leaving China, so we're going to serve our clients there. We're just much more cognizant that the risk is higher. And I put Hong Kong in that bucket too. We kind of look at China, Hong Kong as one at this point from a risk standpoint.
What does the Trump administration mean for the U.S. economy?
I don't know.
Why? Because it's unpredictable, or because we're too soon to actually trying to figure out the policies that he would put in place?
So if you look at history, who was elected president may not necessarily affect the next year. That's kind of like we're a big tanker and that's going to happen. I think the much more important thing is what we do in the geopolitical situation. I've always been quite clear that American leadership is provided to keep the world free and safe for democracy. And that means economic alliances, which includes trade, by the way. I think we should spend more time in trade. It means NATO. It means that Russia should not win in Ukraine, because if they do, I think it can tear asunder this Western world.
I know you've ruled out being Treasury Secretary.
Yeah.
Why? What would it take to get you into politics?
I don't think I'm suited for politics. I love my job, and so I'm not sure I want to do something like that. And I can hopefully.
But even if you got the call, would it be hard to say no?
I don't know. Probably yes. I love my job, and I have no interest in leaving and doing anything else. So.
That was part of Bloomberg's conversation with JPMorgan Chair and CEO Jamie Dimon. You can find that full conversation on the Bloomberg terminal and online. Joe, I would just remind everyone, last I saw Jamie Dimon on Capitol Hill, this was many months ago,
I bet
when we were still buzzing about whether he was going to run in 2024. He said he is not running this cycle. And I said, this cycle or ever? And he said, I never say never to anything. So I'll just leave that out there in the universe.
Well, running is one thing. This idea of being Treasury Secretary, we seem like we're really eager to make this happen in the media for some reason. And he's given us no reason to think that would be in the offing. Might be a pay cut for him, I think, for a minute. Not that he's too worried about making money right now.
Well, that's a very fair point, but it does just kind of raise the questions we all have. Who would serve in a cabinet in, say, a second Trump administration?
I think that might have to be a Biden White House. I don't know about that.
Yeah, fair enough.
We'll keep you posted.
Indeed.
When this develops.
We will. Well, Jamie Dimon was also just talking about China there. We're going to turn to that story next because Vladimir Putin paid a visit to President Xi Jinping. We'll have more on what that means for the war in Ukraine. We'll be joined by Ian Bremmer of GZero Media and the Eurasia Group next on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
We see now President Joe Biden doing this, and what he is trying to do is focusing more on electric vehicles and chips and not focusing necessarily so much on my farmers in Iowa. But certainly when it comes to China, we have to be very cautious. I wish that we would see more engagement pushing back on China, whether it's President Trump, whether it is President Joe Biden.
That was Senator Joni Ernst, the Republican from Iowa, talking with us just a short time ago today on her thoughts on President Biden's decision to raise tariffs on Chinese EVs, chips, and some other items, while also, we note, maintaining all the existing Trump-era tariffs. Joining us now to talk about this and a lot more, Eurasia Group and GZero founder Ian Bremmer. It's great to have you back, as always, on Bloomberg, Ian. Is this the beginning of a trade war or not?
Oh, no. I mean, first of all, you'd hardly call it the beginning since we've been raising tariffs on China for a couple of administrations now, but also because there's still an awful lot of engagement, and the Chinese are still engaged in a charm offensive with American CEOs, with CEOs from around the world, because their economy is underperforming and they don't want to chase away foreign direct investment, which is not doing well right now. And they don't want to see more capital flight. Having said all of that, it is an election time in the United States, and Biden has clearly responded to the fact that a lot of people, not just Senator Joni Ernst, want the Americans to be tougher on China, and $18 billion of tariffs, including 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicle exports to the U.S., will help to respond to that political demand.
Well, Ian, your point is well taken on the idea that Beijing has been playing host to many in corporate America. They also this week, President Xi Jinping, that is playing host to Russian President Vladimir Putin as he makes a trip to China. The two of them today pledging to intensify cooperation against U.S. quote unquote containment of their countries. How worried should we be about how close these two are getting?
I'm more worried about Putin's relationship, which truly is a friendship without limits, with North Korea and Iran. He's getting a lot of weapons from them that he's using against NATO weapons in Ukraine, and he's giving them a lot of technology. And these are countries that are truly chaos actors. They're rogues. They want the U.S. to fail on the global stage. Now, the China relationship with Russia is warm, and it is getting a little friendlier. But there are still some significant limits. So on this trip, I didn't see any progress on the disruption of financial transactions between Russian exporters and Chinese financial institutions because the Chinese government wants to avoid those American sanctions. I didn't see any progress on the construction of the Power of Siberia 2 natural gas pipeline, which the Russians really want, and the Chinese have been dragging their feet on. So there was a lot of, very warm rhetoric between the two countries, and they both criticized the United States as a country that's trying to undermine strategic stability and confiscate foreign assets and property and put unilateral coercive measures on export controls, erecting trade barriers. I mean, all of that stuff was, this sounds good from the Russian and Chinese perspective. But if you had been expecting that there was going to be a concrete policy breakthrough, like what are the deliverables that came from this summit? I don't see many concrete deliverables from this summit.
I want to point you, Ian, in your expertise to America's relationship with Israel. With a new wrinkle today, the House of Representatives, just a short time ago this afternoon, actually passed a bill, as was expected, that would stop the Biden administration from delaying weapons shipments, would compel the administration to provide weapons support, offensive weapons support to Israel. 14 Democrats split from the White House to vote for this. Now, we're hearing this won't see the light of day in the Senate, but a lot of senators are upset about it, including Lindsey Graham, the Republican from South Carolina, said this today earlier on Capitol Hill about the arms shipment to Israel that the administration put on hold. Let's listen.
There is tranches of weapons that haven't been delivered that need to be delivered. The 2,000-pound bombs are necessary to hit tunnels that the cowards are hiding in. They're deep in the ground. They need these bombs that will be, precision guided within a 10-foot radius to go down and get the tunnels. Give them the bombs.
Ian, is Lindsey Graham right?
Well, the Israelis were telling the United States this war was going to be over in a matter of a couple of months. At the beginning, it's been 7 months, and they're still not close to the end. So in that regard, the messaging from the Israeli War Cabinet has been changing a lot over time. This is putting a lot of pressure on Biden. He's losing a lot of support from not only the Republicans, but from Democrats. He's losing from Democrats in the center and on the right from trying to put any pressure on the Israeli War Cabinet in the fight in Rafah, which everyone expects is coming. And he's losing a lot of support on the Democratic left for being as close to Israel and supporting Israel as he has. This is a horrible position for Biden to be in, especially with the fact that the war is going to continue. And the Israeli prime minister, every time Biden says we need more humanitarian aid in for the Palestinians, or we need a two-state solution, or we need you not to attack Rafah, literally every time the Israeli prime minister responds to his strongest ally, providing him most of his military support, is saying, I'm not actually going to listen to you. That makes the president look very, very weak on this global stage.
Well, especially when it's not just the global stage to consider, but the domestic one. And there is clearly a lot of upset in terms of voters' views, young voters especially, including those on college campuses, with the way that this administration has conducted its policy around Israel, and hence the protests we have seen on many college campuses across the country, of course, as well at Columbia University. And Ian, you spoke at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs graduation this past weekend. You talked about some of the protests on campus. We have just a snippet of your speech, and then I'll ask you more.
I have absolutely no doubt that doing good and solving problems are your goals. And yet, you are leaving a campus that has been ripped apart by an intractable problem of our societies in conflict.
Ian, you clearly gave that address at an incredibly tense moment. What was it like to give it?
It was the context was challenging. There were probably a solid 15 or 20% of the graduating students that were wearing keffiyeh in solidarity with the Palestinians, had Palestinian flags that they brought up onto the stage, and or had calls for divestment, a little like wrapped up diploma types that they were handing to the dean, conferring their certificates to them. So, I mean, there's no question this was a hot issue and there were strong passions. But I will tell you, not one student turned their back, not one student left the ceremony. Everybody applauded afterwards. At the beginning of the speech, there were, I heard some chanting, I heard some disruptions, and I just said it was like almost as if there was a fight in a bar. I was just like, hey. Like, just, I'm getting there. I hear you. I'm with you. Give me a second. I'll get there. And to their incredible credit, they did. They did. And over the course of the speech, you could see them willing to listen and engage. And that's been my experience with my students all year long. And that's been my experience on the Columbia campus, that, you can watch the headlines and you can see a small number of crazy people that will give you the headline that you want to promote, that says that they support Hamas. These students don't support Hamas. It's not at all. These students are young people that feel like, a whole bunch of dispossessed people are getting the short end of the stick, and they want to do something about it. Students always have. And if you respect them and you listen to them and you engage with them, you can also challenge them. But it is absolutely essential, if you're going to challenge students, that you're going to be honest and authentic with them, and you're going to talk about your failings and what you haven't done right yourself before they give you any willingness to pay attention. And that I think is the hard thing for a lot of people to do right now.
Indeed. Well, Ian Bremmer of Eurasia Group and GZero Media, we always appreciate your honesty and authenticity on this program. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, still ahead, President Biden is attempting to enhance his support among black voters. We'll be back with our political panel for more on that after the break. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We are marking the 70th anniversary of the landmark Supreme Court decision Brown v. Board of Education. Today, President Biden met with plaintiffs and their family members at the White House.
Karine Jean-Pierre, of course, the White House press secretary, speaking earlier with reporters as President Biden continues outreach to black voters in an attempt to make up for a deficit that we've seen pretty consistently in polling recently. Joining us now, our political panel, Democratic strategist Alvin Jordan is with us alongside Lisa Camooso Miller, former RNC communications director, host of the Friday Reporter podcast. It's great to see both of you with us. Alvin, welcome back to the table. We're told that Jim Clyburn is about to hit the road to try to help make up for, I don't know if you call this a messaging problem, an organizing problem, but he says the polls do not reflect reality. What do you think?
I actually find that to be quite amazing. Just having taken a look at polling that was early, about a year ago, all the way up until the recent quarter, I think it's been pretty consistent both in the numbers and just what I would say in just the actual people and what you're hearing from the so to speak, the grapevine, so to speak. And so I think that's more of an optics response.
Sure.
But I understand, especially, you bring out Senator Claiborne. You're bringing out the heavy hitters to try to pull some of this support. And so...
Can he do it again?
Yeah, I'm not counting him out, but it will be a harder task this time around, that's for sure.
Well, we had the pleasure yesterday here on Balance of Power to speak with Dr. Bernice King, the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. And we asked her what exactly she thought was happening as we're seeing more black voters suggesting that they support Donald Trump. And this is her explanation for what we're seeing.
There are people in the black community who are feeling like not a lot has changed, especially economically in the black community. I think there has to be a plan and a strategy for the Biden administration to really creatively figure out how to reach especially this next generation who's very disgruntled right now.
She said there, Lisa, especially economically. At the end of the day, is this problem one and the same with Biden's wider problem with the economy?
It really feels that way, Kaylee. People are really looking for change. They're looking for difference. They're looking for an administration and a government that can support them and help them get to the next level, to advance, as opposed to staying steady or even falling backward. And so I think that more than optics, more than anything else, these policies and these messages have got to hit and resonate and be the kinds of policies that people can really feel back home.
We turn our attention to another factor that is challenging Joe Biden, and that is this testimony that he delivered to a special counsel that resulted in a report of special counsel calling him essentially an elderly old man with a bad memory. Not to be redundant, but Republicans have the transcript. Republicans on Capitol Hill, they want the recordings. And Joe Biden's not about to hand it over, claiming executive privilege in this case today. Jim Jordan, the House Judiciary Committee chair who wanted those tapes, weighs in. Here's what he said.
This morning, we get an 11th hour invocation of executive privilege. President Biden is asserting executive privilege for the same reason we need the audio recordings. They offer a unique perspective. This last-minute invocation does not change the fact that the Attorney General has not complied with our subpoena.
Did Joe Biden have any other choice here? You know those tapes would have gone into ads throughout the campaign cycle, but also would set precedent for the next president.
It's true, and kind of, ironic given everything that is kind of in play right now. I will say that I don't think that he had another choice. Like we just talked about a moment ago, just how uphill a battle it is to try to pull some support in, and even if it is funny jokes that turn into memes online, I just don't think that the president can afford to, have any steps back in that way. And so I think he just did what he had to do, which in this case, for the optics might look a little, tough, but I think it was really his only choice.
Yeah.
Well, optics are only tough if people really, truly are paying attention. That's right. Lisa, how many voters, especially undecided voters, are likely to consider a question of executive privilege?
I think Alvin makes a good point here, is that these are sound bites and images and other things that can be used on platforms where people are getting their information, like TikTok and Reels and other places where they actually are getting their information in a way that really, and by next week, we won't be talking about this anymore. Even by tomorrow, we won't be talking about this executive privilege. So it was a good call on the side of the White House to say, absolutely not. It's the kind of fodder where people are getting their information and forming opinions.
Yeah. I know I'm not supposed to say this, but I feel your concern. We see the numbers here. Our swing state poll says if this happened today, if the election were today, Joe Biden loses. That's what you see as well.
Well, I don't know if I just see it that definitively, but I will say compared to, 4 years ago, I do feel a bit more concerned. Yeah. I don't think there's any way to skate around it. And I feel like the administration on some level does as well. And it really does seem like even, 6 months out or wherever we are from the election at this point, that they really are starting to hit the gas a little bit on just outreach and starting to, hit some of those targeted areas where they do need to drum up some more support.
Mm-hmm.
And also challenging your opponent in November to a debate. Yeah. Just remind everyone. 48 hours ago, there were no debates on the calendar.
Yeah.
Now we have 2. So I'll just leave that there. And, of course, the individual who Joe Biden will be debating is Donald Trump. We're going to turn our attention to him next as Michael Cohen, his former fixer and attorney, returns to the witness stand in his hush money trial. Our political panel will be back with more on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's former fixer, returned to court to testify for a third day against his former boss in the hush money case. Back with us now is our political panel, Democratic strategist Alvin Jordan and Lisa Camooso Miller, former RNC communications director. So, Lisa, the judge said today we could see closing arguments on Tuesday. We are getting into the end stages here of this trial, which means that it could be just a matter of weeks before Donald Trump is either acquitted or found guilty and becomes a convicted felon. At the end of the day, what is all of this testimony and pomp and circumstance and visits from a variety of sitting lawmakers going to mean?
I think it just means that the campaign is in New York right now. I mean, it feels that way, right? With all of the parade of lawmakers that are headed to New York and all the conversations that are happening. Kaylee, I'm not sure that whatever the outcome is of this court case will have any impact on the election at all. In fact, if anything, it's just another conversation that Donald Trump gets to have about how he feels like he's been targeted by the U.S. government.
Really? No impact on the election? Even if this is a conviction, how does this play in middle America? We say, boy, he was found guilty by a jury.
I haven't heard any real world sway based on the outcomes of any of these trials, unfortunately. And so I think that, and I think it's a point that has been made at this desk and a lot of others, which is most people, as it pertains to President Trump versus President Biden, have made up their mind. Yeah. And they either blindly support the president, similar to kind of the peanut gallery that floated up to New York today, or they're truly, kind of undecided and are playing it out. And I think, we talked about or alluded to debates earlier, but some of those things will play out. But that's a smaller percentage than those that are either true Trump supporters or, towing the line from a Democratic standpoint. Yeah.
Well, on the subject of Trump supporters or even potential Trump vice presidential candidate, Senator J.D. Vance, who was at court earlier this week, spoke to Bloomberg about this case on Capitol Hill earlier today.
Been judged in the court of public opinion is largely a farce. Every day that it proceeds, I think his public opinion position gets stronger or at least stays the same. I don't know how the jury could convict him, but even if they do, I don't see anything changing the course of the race.
So maybe he kind of agrees with you on this,
Sure
Lisa, and Alvin, you as well to a certain extent. But it wasn't just him that made the trip up to New York. We saw Matt Gaetz up there today, Lauren Boebert. We've seen a number of others, Byron Donalds, who apparently is on the Veep list, Vivek Ramaswamy. I mean, I could go on and on and on. The courthouse is like the hottest ticket in Republican politics right now, Lisa.
But if the presidential candidate on the Republican side can't travel to Iowa and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin with his surrogates, then I guess his surrogates are going to come to him in Lower Manhattan, right? I mean, I think that that's what it feels like. Do I think that this could backfire, though? Yes, I absolutely do, because I think that if they continue to, during a work week, I mean, Alvin said it himself just a couple minutes ago, if they're going to New York when they should be doing work in Washington, at what point do the voters say enough is enough? Get back to work and do something for the economy for me.
Well, how about being at the microphone or in the courtroom if and when Donald Trump is found guilty? Is that the day that you want to be there as a Republican?
That's a risk.
Yeah.
I think that's a risk, Joe. That's
He'd
a good
like
point.
to have a crowd with him.
I'm sure he would. But if you're running for re-election yourself, or you're thinking about your own ascension in the party, you probably need to think about your own brand and standing behind somebody after a guilty. I don't think that that's great optics.
Wow.
Well, it's worth pointing out, we have seen a number of vice presidential candidates or people we understand might be on the short list for Donald Trump. There's a few we haven't seen yet. If you don't go to New York, Alvin, do we think you're still on the list? I'm thinking, Senator Marco Rubio, for example.
If you're not in New York, I would imagine you probably aren't on the list. And I think that, part of why the group that is in New York is to avoid being called out, later down the line, whether it be at a debate on Truth Social or wherever these things pop up. And so I think that is definitely a hedge that's happening right now, in both ways, both in the positive and in the negative, I guess, to a certain extent. But I think the people that are there are definitely trying to write themselves out of any jokes or punchlines that are coming their way.
Yeah, maybe this is the administration taking form in a courtroom
perhaps
as we speak. Alvin Jordan, great to have you. And Lisa Camooso Miller, made smarter today with Mikey Miller, with us today in the Bureau as well. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. We'll be back here Friday, tomorrow, with more. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.